Imagine for a moment that everything we thought we knew about the very first beings to bury their dead, and what that really tells us about intelligence, about culture, was maybe completely wrong.
Yeah, fundamentally wrong. We're talking
Okay.
about a scientific claim that could, well, genuinely rewrite a big chunk of ancient history.
It's pretty staggering. Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into some truly astonishing research.
That's right. Today we're exploring the evidence suggesting that Homo naledi now, this is a hominin species with a brain roughly a third the size of ours, might have intentionally buried their dead hundreds of thousands of years ago.
And not just anywhere, right? But in one of the most difficult, challenging places you could imagine,
Yeah.
the Rising Star Cave system down in South Africa.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really crack open the details from a recent Alive article. We're going to look at the archaeology, the geology,
The clues, the debates.
right, the scientific debate that's kicked off, which has been pretty intense,
Yeah.
and figure out what this, well, potentially landmark finding actually means for how we see early hominin behavior.
Because this research, it doesn't just push boundaries, does it? It feels like it kind of shatters some long-held ideas about intelligence and cultural sophistication in our ancient relatives.
It absolutely does. Challenges those assumptions head on.
It's wild to think about. Could a species with a brain that small really have engaged in something so, well, so human as burying their dead?
That's the big question we're digging into.
Okay, let's unpack this. Prepare yourselves. This could genuinely change how you think about our ancient family tree.
Let's dive in.
So let's just jump right into the core of this incredible claim. Researchers are saying Homo naledi practiced intentional burial.
Intentional funerary practices, yeah.
Mhm.
And you said it's not just a big claim, it's colossal.
Colossal, exactly, because historically, we've pretty much only seen this kind of behavior in Homo sapiens, us, and Neanderthals, the species with the big brains.
Right. Much larger cranial capacity.
Mhm.
So suggesting it now for Homo naledi with its relatively small brain, I mean, that dramatically shifts the timeline for these complex behaviors.
It really reshapes things. Is that why it's being called a landmark finding? Because of that timeline shift?
That's the use part of it, yeah. The data, they have places these burials somewhere between 335,000 and 241,000 years ago.
Wow. Okay, put that in perspective for us.
Well, think about this. That could be up to 160,000 years before the earliest known Homo sapiens burials anywhere in Africa.
160,000 years earlier.
Yeah. And while it's, more recent than some Neanderthal sites like Cima de los Huesos in Spain,
Okay.
it still puts Homo naledi squarely in the frame for complex behavior way earlier than most people would have ever predicted.
So when a claim this big, this revolutionary hits the science world, you expect some pushback, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the life assessment mentioned that the reviewers were definitely split.
Split, how?
Well, some felt the evidence was convincing, that it convincingly demonstrated intentional burial practices. But others were skeptical,
Skeptical about what specifically?
mostly about how the hominins actually got into those really deep, difficult chambers in the first place. They felt that part of the story was maybe incomplete.
Okay, so that raises the key question for us and for you listening. How good is this evidence? What did they actually find down there?
That's exactly what we need to dig into. But first, we really have to set the scene. The Rising Star Cave system itself is, well, it's a character in this story. Its difficulty is part of the evidence.
Oh, yeah, the setting is just extreme, isn't it? We're talking about the Dinaledi subsystem places like the Hill Antechamber and Dinaledi Chamber, and also the Lesedi Chamber, deep inside the earth in South Africa.
About 30 meters down, yeah, that's roughly 100 feet below the surface.
And getting there is not a casual stroll. It involves sheer vertical drops and these incredibly tight squeezes, some only 18 to 30 centimeters wide.
That's right, like trying to get through a mail slot almost.
It immediately makes you think, okay, bodies probably didn't just accidentally wash in or fall in. It seems unlikely.
Highly unlikely. And because of that extreme environment and how fragile the bones are, the research team had to be incredibly careful.
How so? What did they do differently?
Well, they avoided destructive digging wherever possible. They leaned heavily on non-destructive techniques, things like 3D laser scanning, micro-CT scans, which are like super detailed 3D X-ray.
Okay, high-tech stuff.
Very. And in some really crucial spots, they actually removed entire blocks of sediment with the bones still inside, totally intact. They call it en bloc removal.
Wow, lifting the whole section out.
Exactly, to preserve every single spatial relationship, every bit of context, so they could study it meticulously back in the lab. It's this incredibly precise, almost surgical approach that gives their claims real weight.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so they were super careful in this crazy cave system. Let's get to the evidence itself. What did they actually find in these supposed burial features?
Okay, so the researchers focused on three main areas, these key features. One in the hill antechamber, another called naledi feature 1, and then a more complex spot known as the puzzle box area.
And were there common threads, things they saw in all these places?
Yes, definitely. First, these weren't just random scatterings of bones. They were clearly discrete, bounded features,
Meaning?
meaning distinct, concentrated patches of skeletons. They stood out sharply from the surrounding sediment, which was mostly empty of bones. They weren't part of some big, continuous bone bed. It suggests deliberate placement.
Okay, deliberate placement. What else?
The sediment inside these features was totally different from the sediment around them.
How so?
Inside, it was chaotic, jumbled, unstructured. It didn't have the nice, neat layers you see in undisturbed cave floors.
Yeah.
That points strongly towards digging, like someone dug a pit or a hole.
Okay. Digging disturbance. That's a big clue.
A very big clue. And maybe the most critical finding, preserved articulations.
Bones still connected. After all that time.
Yes, parts of the skeleton still in anatomical connection, hands, feet, sections of the rib cage. It means the bodies must have been largely intact, held together by soft tissue when they were covered.
So they weren't just burying dry bones.
No, these were bodies. And crucially, the way the bones were fractured shows the breaks happened after decomposition, after the bones lost their fresh resilience. They broke later while protected within the sediment.
Which rules out things like, what, being killed by predators or violence before burial?
Exactly. It rules out perimortem trauma and carnivore damage. The big takeaway is that these bodies were covered, encased in sediment, before they fully decomposed. That's why the articulations were preserved.
Got it. And you mentioned something about other animals?
Right. Critically, there's a near-total absence of bones from other large animals mixed in with the Homo naledi remains.
That's weird for a cave, isn't it? Usually you find all sorts of stuff.
Very unusual. Most natural cave accumulations, whether from predators or natural traps, are a mix of species. This lack of fauna strongly suggests it wasn't a typical natural process.
Okay, let's zoom in on those specific features then. The hill antechamber. What did they find there?
In the hill antechamber, they found an adult, designated individual 1, and the positioning was really striking.
How was it positioned?
Lying on its back supine, but with the knees and ankles really sharply bent, almost in a cross-legged fetal position. The right arm was tightly flexed, hand up near the head, and the left arm was across the torso.
That sounds deliberate, not just how a body would randomly fall.
It really doesn't. And again, they found both easily separated joints, like fingers and toes, and more durable ones preserved, which supports that idea of rapid covering.
And didn't you mention something about sediment support?
Yes. The way the sediment was packed seemed to hold the torso and upper limbs slightly separate from the lower limbs, suggesting it provided support before the body collapsed during decomposition.
Okay, that's fascinating. And what about this potential grave good?
Ah, yes, this is really intriguing. Near the right hand of individual 1, they found a single stone object. It wasn't just any rock. It had a distinctive shape, quite different from other stones in the chamber, and it was embedded at a specific angle, about 25 degrees.
So potentially placed there on purpose.
Potentially. The researchers are cautious. They don't definitively claim it as a grave good, but its context is suggestive. It raises the possibility of intentional placement.
Wow. And the shape of the feature itself?
Also interesting, the very bottom layer wasn't flat. It was sort of concave, like a shallow bowl made of small stones and some gaps. And crucially, it sloped upwards against the natural slope of the cave floor. That's not consistent with sediment naturally filling a pre-existing dip. It looks more like the base of a dug feature.
Okay, moving to naledi feature 1. What was the story there?
naledi feature 1 seems to be primarily a single adult burial. But intriguingly, there were some fragments from at least one younger individual found above the main skeleton.
Above, what does that suggest?
It suggests some later disturbance. Maybe the feature was partially dug into later, or maybe material was added during backfilling. It hints at activity over time.
And what about the position of the bones here?
Again, evidence of matrix support. They found articulated ribs oriented almost vertically in the sediment, and skull fragments were also held in subvertical positions by the surrounding dirt, not how bones would settle naturally.
And the surrounding soil, did that show digging too?
Yes. There's a distinct layer of sediment there, a laminated orange, silty mudstone, nice and layered usually. But at the edges of feature 1, This layer was clearly cut off, truncated.
Like someone dug through it.
Exactly. It suggests a hole was dug before the body and the fill sediment were put in. And the sediment inside the feature was coarse, homogeneous, looking very much like the excavated material from the surrounding layers, consistent with backfill.
Okay, the evidence is building. What about the puzzle box area? You said that was the most complex.
Yes, the puzzle box is fascinating. It contains remains from at least 6 different Homo naledi individuals. And again, virtually no other animal bones.
6 individuals in one spot.
Yeah. And the bones weren't layered neatly. They were clustered three-dimensionally, with some elements sticking out at steep angles, again showing they were supported by the sediment matrix as they were buried.
Any specific finds that stand out there?
Definitely the infant skeleton, DH7. It's only partial. But the bones, even tiny, fragile ones like parts of the vertebrae, were found highly localized and in anatomical order.
Meaning the infant was buried whole.
It strongly implies the body was placed there as a complete unit, not as scattered, disarticulated bones.
What else?
They also found fragments from 4 different adult skulls, DH1 through DH4. Now, get this. The fragments clearly belonged together. They could be refitted,
Okay.
but they were found separated in the ground, spatially displaced.
How far apart?
Some pieces were up to 15 centimeters apart horizontally, maybe 10 centimeters vertically, and lying at all different angles. They even found a fragment of thigh bone standing vertically among the pieces of one of the skulls.
That's bizarre. How does that happen naturally?
It doesn't, really. This kind of reworking where associated pieces are moved apart but stay in the same local area is very hard to explain by natural settling, gravity, or water movement.
So what does it suggest?
It strongly suggests repeated hominin activity in that exact spot. Maybe digging subsequent burials disturbed the earlier ones, moving the pieces around. It points to naledi themselves as the agents of this disturbance.
Okay, that's a mountain of really specific, unusual evidence. So how did the team use this to rule out all the other possible explanations?
Right, because that's crucial. You have to show why the alternatives don't fit the evidence. So they systematically went through the possibilities. First, natural accumulation.
Like bodies just washing in or falling down?
Exactly. Could it be passive gravity like a talus slope or slumping? They say no. The remains are in those discrete patches, not spread out. And articulated bodies just couldn't navigate those tight passages by gravity alone. Plus, remember, the sediment under the puzzle box was undisturbed. No sign of collapse from above.
Okay, so not gravity. What about just slow, gradual burial over time?
Also ruled out. The way bones were angled, almost vertically sometimes. The larger rocks mixed within articulated skeletons, the disruption of the natural sediment layers, none of that fits with slow, gentle sedimentation.
What about a sudden event like a mud flow or debris slump carrying them in?
They looked closely at the sediment structure micromorphology. The evidence points overwhelmingly to dry cave conditions. They found what's called auto-brecciated sediments, basically rock breaking up in place in dry conditions. No sign of water saturation, mud flows, or any kind of mass transport event that could carry articulated bodies. It just doesn't fit the geology.
Okay, so natural geological processes seem unlikely. What about biological explanations? Carnivores?
That's usually a prime suspect in cave bone accumulations. But here, falsified. There are simply no carnivore tooth marks, no punctures, no gnawing, no characteristic breakage patterns on any of the Homo naledi bones. Zero evidence.
And the lack of other animal bones kind of supports that too, right?
Exactly. If predators were dragging naledi in, you'd expect remains of their other prey too. The absence is telling.
What about natural mummification? Could that explain the preserved joints?
Good question, but no. They didn't find any preserved soft tissue itself.
Yeah.
The articulations held because the bodies were rapidly buried in sediment before full decomposition, not because they dried out like mummies. And anyway, the high humidity in these deep caves isn't right for natural mummification.
Okay, one more. Could they have been burying bones that were already old and defleshed? Secondary burial.
Also doesn't fit the evidence. The anatomical order of the skeletons, the evidence that connective tissue was still present when buried, and finding all those tiny hand and foot bones.
Which would get lost easily if you were moving dry bones around.
Precisely. Those tiny elements would likely be winnowed out, lost during transport or reburial if they were dealing with skeletons, not bodies. It points to primary burial of fleshed remains.
So when you strip away all those other explanations, intentional burial by Homo naledi starts to look like the strongest candidate.
It becomes the most parsimonious explanation, yeah. The one that best fits all the diverse lines of evidence together. The researchers tested it against a minimal definition. Did a hominin dig a hole? Was a body put in it? Was it covered rapidly with sediment?
And they argue the evidence supports yes to those questions.
They do, and they make an important point about how we approach this kind of evidence.
Which is?
They acknowledge that early hominins might not have buried their dead like we do, or even like Neanderthals did. No perfectly neat graves, maybe no obvious grave goods in most cases. So finding unambiguous proof by modern standards is really tough.
Right. We can't expect them to fit our mold perfectly.
Exactly. And crucially, they argue against the traditional archaeological bias, the idea that you must disprove every single conceivable natural explanation before you're allowed to even consider a cultural one, especially for non-sapien species.
That sounds like a fairer approach. Less biased against finding complexity in other hominins.
It is. They advocate for a parsimony approach instead. Look at all the evidence together and ask, what single explanation makes the most sense of the entire pattern?
And when you do that,
the evidence for Homo naledi agency becomes compelling. The discrete features, the disturbed sediment inside them, the flexed bodies, the rapid burial of fleshed remains, that possible grave good, the reworking in the puzzle box, it all points towards naledi actively creating these features.
it paints a picture of repeated intentional behavior.
It does. And it's not just burials. Remember, there's other evidence emerging from Rising Star, too.
Oh, right, the engravings.
Exactly. Rock engravings, geometric shapes and patterns, also attributed to Homo naledi, found on the cave walls nearby. It adds another layer to this picture of surprisingly complex cognitive and cultural behavior in this small-brained hominin.
Wow. This species just keeps rewriting the textbooks, doesn't it?
It certainly seems that way.
Okay, so this deep dive has really laid out a fascinating case. We've walked through the evidence from Rising Star, the distinct burial spots, the careful body positions, the soil analysis, the bone conditions, and how all the natural explanations just don't seem to fit the full picture.
It's a complex puzzle, but the pieces seem to point strongly towards intentional burial by Homo naledi.
And the implications are just huge. I mean, what's truly staggering here, and what I hope you're taking away, is how this discovery so ancient and linked to a hominin with a relatively small brain just fundamentally challenges our old ideas.
It really does. Our traditional narratives about intelligence, about cultural evolution, even about what it means to be human. This suggests that complex, maybe even symbolic behaviors like caring for the dead might not be exclusively tied to brain size in the simple way we often assumed.
It blows that assumption wide open. So if Homo naledi felt compelled to do this, to go to such incredible effort to get into these deep, dark, dangerous caves, to carefully place bodies, maybe even leave an object, what does that tell us?
What does it suggest about their emotional lives, their social bonds, how they perceived mortality?
Yeah. How might this make you, listening right now, rethink what made our own species unique, or maybe what wasn't unique? What about all the other hominins who shared this planet with us?
It really raises a profound question, doesn't it? Could things like empathy, ritual, these deep cultural responses to death, could they have emerged multiple times in different ways within our evolutionary family, far more often and far more divergently than we ever thought possible?
That is definitely a thought to chew on. Could our capacity for these behaviors be much older and much more widespread among our relatives than we ever gave them credit for?
It is.
Yeah. Something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.